It's Tuesday on Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Happy to be back for another day. Hope everyone's having a good one out there. Really good show coming up. Chip Scoggins from the Tribune, columnist, joins me here in just a few minutes to talk a few different things. NBA draft is coming up Wednesday and Thursday this week. We'll get into a little bit of draft talk, a lot of Wolves off-season talk. We'll do more draft talk planning on Wednesday's show with Chris Hine from the Tribune. But Chip and I get into the draft. We get into a little bit of Twin stuff, a little bit of Wild stuff. Minnesota Wild, not super wild stuff. But Chip and I went deep on a bunch of stuff. So enjoy that here in just a few minutes. Got a couple stray thoughts at the end of the show, including Stanley Cup. What a Stanley Cup Finals. Edmonton comes all the way back to tie the series 3-3, but then Florida prevails in 7 games last night. Quite a series. I think that's what Wolves fans were hoping for when the Wolves won Game 4 against Dallas, but could not come all the way back. Edmonton gets much closer in the Stanley Cup Finals, but cannot complete the comeback. Speaking of the Wolves, what I miss, Chris Finch signs a 4-year extension, or at least a contract that will keep him here for the next 4 years. Much deserved, terms not disclosed, but knowing you've got Chris Finch here for the next 4 years has to be a good feeling for the Wolves, who now have a certain level of continuity if they want it, right? They've got to establish, they got to establish ownership continuity. They got to figure this whole ownership thing out. They got to figure out Tim Connolly, who's got that opt-out next year, although that's a little bit squishy in terms of what that really means. But their roster, if they want it to be stable, can be stable. And they've got their head coach nailed down. Not a surprise, but they've got him nailed down. They've got him locked down now for the next few years, the next 4 years. Now, there's a handful of Chris Finch criticizers out there, right? Like, I don't know exactly who they are. Like, this is a guy who is, in the running for Coach of the Year, coached the All-Star game, led them to the conference finals, has helped them get better basically every year he's been here, it seems like. I know they had a little blip a couple years ago, but they still made the playoffs in that kind of frustrating first year with Rudy Gobert. There was kind of some growing pains that led to this year. He's a very good coach. He's not the best coach in the NBA. He is one of the 5 or 10 best coaches in the NBA. I think we can say that right now, given what he has gotten out of this roster. If you still don't think that, even if you don't love Chris Finch, just compare this to the other coaches in Timberwolves history and think about where they have been. I was doing that earlier today, just before I started recording, just looking at the 14 head coaches in Timberwolves history, Chris Finch being the 14th. He's already coached the second most games, 287, which is amazing to me. It doesn't feel like he's been here that long, and he really hasn't. He's been here for 3 full seasons, part of a 4th. That puts him in the category where he has coached the second most games in franchise history. He's won the second most games in franchise history. No other coaches besides Chris Finch and Flip Saunders have even won 100 games in Timberwolves history, even though they have had 14 head coaches. This is not a great list. I'm going to take it chronologically. And some of these guys were good coaches. All of them were hired for a reason at whatever point they were hired, but very few of them had any sort of success. Starting at the beginning, Bill Musselman coached 2 years. Jimmy Rogers after that, Sidney Lowe, Bill Blair, Flip Saunders. He had 2 different tenures, obviously, but the late Flip Saunders, the most decorated, most successful coach long-term in franchise history. Kevin McHale followed the first Flip Saunders era. Dwayne Casey, Randy Whitman, Kurt Rambis, Rick Adelman, Sam Mitchell, Tom Thibodeau, Ryan Saunders, and now Chris Finch. Think about all of these coaches. Think about this. 2 of these coaches, Rambis and Jimmy Rogers, had winning percentages with the Wolves below 200. Jimmy Rogers was 21-90. Kurt Rambis was 32-132. A full 100 games under 500 in just 2 seasons as head coach. 3 other coaches were under 300. Sidney Lowe, Bill Blair, and Randy Whitman with the Wolves. A bunch more were under 400. Ryan Saunders and Bill Musselman were barely over 300. Then you get like the guys who had a little bit more success. Sam Mitchell was okay in his 1 year here. I thought he did pretty well with what he had. Dwayne Casey, he was a good coach. He just didn't have a lot to work with. Kevin McHale did fine in his kind of interim year, and then the year after that. And then you got, obviously, Rick Adelman did okay. Tom Thibodeau had some success, got into the playoffs, one of only 3 coaches to get to the playoffs. But in terms of actual success, we're talking about 2 guys, Flip Saunders and Chris Finch. Chris Finch now has the best playoff 1-loss record in Wolves history, 12-15. Not saying much, but 12-15 is better than Flip's mark of 17-30. He's got the best regular season winning percentage of any Wolves coach in franchise history. So just look at, even if you don't love Chris Finch, even if there's some things about his rotations or how he coaches that bother you, just have some perspective. Think about where the Wolves have been in their franchise history with these head coaches. Think about how many times they've had starts and stops, how the coach hasn't quite been the right match for the players, how the coach, maybe it was overmatched, wasn't ready for the job, was in a bad situation where the players just weren't good enough. The Wolves are in a spot now where they have a coach who gets the most out of his players most nights, gets them to the playoffs, got them to the Western Conference Finals. They've been to the playoffs now 3 years in a row. This is, he's presiding over already the second most successful era in Wolves history, and probably on the verge of being the most successful era in Wolves history. If they can, have another 2-3 years like the one they just had, this will be the most successful era in Wolves history. So let's make this a little bit of a Chris Finch appreciation segment for not only what he is, but for what he is not, and compared to Wolves' past coaching history. Let's bring in Star Tribune columnist Chip Scoggins right now. Chip and I, a couple guys that just got off vacation, trying to catch up, Chip, to everything that's been going on. Twins, Timberwolves. It was a tumultuous week for the Minnesota United soccer team, as my friend and Star Tribune writer John Marthaler points out. He's been doing a lot of work for us this season, points out that they've been in a turmoil spot. Royce and I did not talk a lot of soccer on Monday, Chip, surprisingly, but I want to engage you in all sorts of stuff, including draft. NBA draft is just a day away now. It's a 2-day affair, Wednesday and Thursday this year. First round Wednesday, second round Thursday. Wolves have the 27th and 37th pick. Interesting kind of what they might do with it. What are your kind of big picture thoughts on where they could go with this in a season that's pretty important?
Yeah, if we operate under the assumption that they're going to run it back, which I don't think we've been given any indications that they won't, and I think they probably should. Now there are people that want to debate whether they should trade Towns and really do something dramatic to get them past this step that they took. I would give it one more year to see if this was kind of the stepping, the ladder effect that, next year you're
right,
better off to do it. But to me, if you look at it, at some point there has to be a succession plan for Mike Conley. We all love Mike Conley, what he's brought to professionalism, as, great a teammate as you're going to find. What was the teammate of the year, right, in the league?
Yes. So literally the best teammate you can find.
And he is. I mean, if you spend any time around him, you can see why he's so respected and revered around the league. But he's 37, and we saw the injuries pile up on him at the end of last year. And they have to figure out a succession plan there. And anyone who watched the Wolves and the Mavs and kind of down the stretch, and then watched the Boston Celtics win the finals easily, they got to get more shooting. Yeah, they have to get more shooting. Too often in that Dallas series, Luka didn't guard anyone. He stayed in the paint and just hoped that either Kyle Anderson, Jay McDaniels missed a corner three. They just didn't have enough guys that spaced the floor and punished teams for helping off when Anthony Edwards tried to drive to the basket. And so you saw Boston, their formula is 2 great superstars and some guys that can really shoot it. And so I think that is the area where either through this draft or through what minimal moves they can make in free agency or trade because of the salary cap situation, that they have to get more shooting first, but at some point, and I don't know if you're going to find your point guard picking at 27, but they're going to have to address that situation.
I think they can certainly find a rotation player at 27, right? Like that's
Yeah, you
a lot of
should.
times that's what happens. Everybody else, the teams below them or the teams that are drafting before them, a lot of them, especially in the lottery, are teams that are rebuilding that are going to kind of go for higher ceiling kind of players. That's what they've gone for in the past, right? Like Anthony Edwards was pretty raw when he first got here. Jaden McDaniels was raw. Those guys become cornerstone players when you give them 4 or 5 years to kind of build up to that. The Wolves now, though, aren't at a point where they can, take on a project. They kind of need help now. And, a lot of times those guys are available in the draft because everybody else is taking the projects, right? Like they might wind up with someone who's like 23 who, played all 4 years in college, something like that. Someone who's more established can come in and be an 8th or 9th guy, can be a backup point guard, can be a shooter off the bench, whatever it is. They can get that kind of player. Is that enough, though? Is that enough to make the difference? Because, like you said, Boston kind of showed you the formula. They had this 5-out offense where they're, everybody can shoot, and the Wolves are never going to be that team as long as they have Rudy Gobert. They do it differently. Like, is what they can add this offseason enough to get to that next level?
Yeah, I don't know. It's still the great. I don't know if mystery is the right thing, but thing they have to prove is, can you win with a defensive first approach? Because there were too many times in that series where you would see Gobert, Kyle Anderson, and then maybe another non-shooter out there. And defensively, yeah, you probably like that, but shooters are going to find a way, and these teams are going to find ways to create shots for teammates, and whether it's drive and kick or ball movement, they're going to find ways to beat that. And so I don't know if they can make is one move going to put them over the, find one more corner 3 guy that's going to,
Right.
be a reliable outside shooter. Is that going to put them over the top? I don't know. I mean, I look at, let's just say the Dallas series, the first 4 games were all winnable. I mean,
yes,
Game 5 they got blown off the floor, but so it wasn't like they're just so overmatched. Now I just think Dallas, or I think Boston, the way they were put together, I think they were the best team. I think they would have beat the Timberwolves had they got there. So, but you have to start there. If they're not going to make a dramatic move, and to me, the only one that you would really, it's even feasible. And I don't even know how feasible trading Towns would be with his salary. Because then is it this year he jumps up to 50 million?
He and Edwards both jump up this year.
Yeah. So is another team going to be willing to take on that? I have my doubts, and so I don't know. You just have to hope that if you keep adding pieces, that this whole process, that Ant's going to come back better. I mean, Gobert is what he is. I think Towns at this point, he's been in the league 9 years. He is what he is.
Right.
And so I think Ant can keep ascending. But I really, Mike, the point guard position, they have to address it. I mean, Mike Conley, you don't want to have a 38, 39-year-old point guard that you're playing however many minutes, because you don't have a real good when he's off the court, it's noticeable how much more efficiently that offense run when he's out there. So they have to figure, to me, that's the most important thing right now.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, and you look at it, like Ant definitely has we would think he has another level or 2 that he can get to. Second team All NBA this year. That was a big jump, but he's still young. He's still just 22. Like, he's got levels left in his game. And I think they definitely left something out there in that Dallas series. There's going to be, there's pride, I'm sure, for them and how this season went and how far they went, but there's also got to be some regret. And like, you have no idea if you can get back to that point, if that opportunity presents itself. But Ant can ascend. But aside from him and probably McDaniels, a little bit of Naz Reid probably too. Yeah. Like, who on this team right now is going to get better versus who, you're not going to get a better year next year out of Rudy Gobert than you got last year. Like, he was great. He was primarily healthy, defensive player of the year. You're not going to get a better season out of him. You could get close to an equivalent season out of him because he's not like 35. He's still probably in his prime. But are you going to get a better season out of Mike Conley? No, you're probably likely to get a slight regression year out of him. Are you going to get a better year out of Towns? Probably not. You might get a comparable year. So they got a lot of guys where you're in danger not just of like standing still with them, but of hitting a certain wall and starting to regress a little bit. That's where they got to be careful.
Yeah, I mean, you've hit a ceiling on some of these guys. The one I think, and that Patrick wrote about this after the season, I agree with. They need to figure out McDaniels' offense. Yeah. Why did his shooting regress to the degree that it did? If they can get more consistent shooting out of him and more consistent offense, because I remember I wrote about it in the was it the Denver Dallas series they run together? I can't remember, but he had the one game, he had a couple back-to-back games, and Chris Finch said he is the X factor for offense. When he gets 10 shots, we typically win. And he had a couple, I think maybe even a 20-point game in there. And it is true. Like that just shows that they're playing the right way. The ball's moving. He's confident in his shot. And so they have to figure out, like, if they can get his offense going, well, then all of a sudden that changes the conversation, because now you have McDaniels, Ant, and Towns as scorers. And so I think in terms of the bigger picture, like, how does this team improve? I think a lot of it is McDaniels, because, again, you're right. Gobert, Towns, they sort of are what they are. Their game's not going to fluctuate or change or grow too much. But I think McDaniels, they have to figure out his offense again, because he's, terrific defensively. We know that, but the drop in his shooting percentage this year, they need to figure out why that happened and how they can improve it.
I wonder if some of it is just the fact of how much they put on him defensively. They keep adding everything he has to do. Like it's mentally taxing, it's physically taxing. Like, I don't know if that's got something to do with it, but I know they've asked a decent amount of him throughout his career, but they are asking a lot of him to be guarding the best player almost all the time.
Yeah, they're surely some of that probably to it. How much of it is just his inconsistency in shots that he gets from night to night? I mean, some games he's really assertive. Some games he just kind of stands there and doesn't, the ball doesn't come to him, or he's not looking for a shot. And so it's like he never gets in that rhythm or has that same mindset as, I'm coming in to be a scorer, consistently. So like that, if I was Tim Conley and Chris Finch, that would be a big project of mine in this offseason. Is like, we need to make him more consistent offense. We need to figure out a way to make him more confident. He's got to work on his outside shot, because that shot was there, that corner three, a lot. The way the Ant's going to, if they're going to guard Ant the way we saw in the playoffs, where they're helping out and sliding in the gaps, that driving kick is going to be there. And, he could really expand his game. And so to me, is get him going and then figure out the point guard. And I mean, do you go into this thing, Mike, this draft saying, we need to draft a point guard? Are you thinking, on the market, is there a trade? Because I don't think you can keep putting this decision off.
Yeah, I think,
there's going to have to be a passing of the torch at some point here.
Yeah, well, but they've got Conley signed for 2 more years, so it's like they're at least probably like committed to a timeshare at some point, and maybe that helps them. If they can target someone who they think can play 20 minutes a night pretty soon, that might at least kind of get them where they need to be next year, and then they kind of kick it down the road a year or two, or see if that player becomes good enough to be the starter. I think that's, if they can find a point guard who can play pretty much right away, at least as a 15 to 20 minute backup, and a guy can shoot, that's probably your best case scenario, right? And a guy who is, maybe a little bit bigger than Conley. Like, it's a lot to ask from 27, but those guys are a lot of times there just because everybody else is going after the potential all-star. They're going for upside, not for eighth man.
Well, and I do say this, I have a lot of faith in Tim Conley as a evaluator of talent. We've seen what he did in Denver, what he's done here in terms of identifying and seeing guys that can improve and fit what they're doing. I mean, but there's so much trust in Chris Finch and that staff on what Mike Conley gives to this, this team. So that's an important role that they're going to have to, somebody's going to have to take over at some point. And I'm not saying, Conley's done and washed up, but they lean on him so heavily that they need to, start to have a transition plan there.
And he's been relatively healthy when he's been here. He obviously had to fight through the stuff in the playoffs, but he only missed the one game. But, in the regular season, he was pretty healthy. That's not a guarantee. That's not a guarantee.
Yeah, as you get older, for sure.
And he's got a history a little bit too. So
yeah,
I don't know. You look at it, you're like, Cam Christie is projected to go like right around where they pick. Like that's the kind of player that gets picked in the first round. No disrespect to Cam Christie, but he's not NBA ready right now. He's
not physically.
Anybody who drafted him would be looking at 2-3 years down the road, I would think.
I mean, he's a guy that needs to get, physically stronger, and just he's not going to come in and be in your rotation. Day one, it's not going to happen. Not for the Wolves, maybe for a lesser team, maybe, but no. So that's why I wonder: is there something, some kind of trade or free agent? And I don't know the cap, space and how all that would work. That's for smarter people than me, but they are a team that they're not looking for projects. They're not looking for down the road. This is a team that you set the bar. Like anything shy of, the Western Conference Finals, is going to be a disappointment. You want to keep building and trying to, win that championship. And so the window is for this group because of Conley and Gobert's age. And let's be honest, Town. I mean, this is going to be year 10. I mean, you need to, yes, you have Ant who's 22. And so you feel like you're always going to have a chance at that. But for this nucleus, this group, you have a couple older guys that need to try to do it right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to think about Gobert's contract too is kind of interesting because after this year, he has an opt out. So he's kind of in that point where after this year, you either got to talk about what's his long-term future. Is there another extension for him? How does that fit? So that could be, I guess, part of their hesitancy to trade Towns at this point too, because you got to think about, well, what's the long-term plan at center? How do you want to build yourself big picture? But I think for right now that you're probably right. They probably need to keep this, give it as much a chance to run it back with as many improvements as you can around the margins, as long as whoever's the owner can stomach what promises to be like a $50 or $60 million luxury tax bill if they keep everybody.
That is the great unknown, right? I mean, who's going to be the owner when this thing goes through arbitration? And if it's not Glenn Taylor, if it's Lori and A-Rod, are they going to be willing to spend that, what is it, the second apron?
Second apron, yeah.
Which is
even
a lot of money.
Even as much money as these guys have, and even if it's Glenn Taylor who still holds on to the team, and the valuation's gone up, over $1 billion, like it's got to kill these guys to write a check for $60 million for basically nothing. You're not buying a player. You're just you're buying tax.
That's it. Well, it can't be, I hope we're a championship team. It better be, I believe we're a championship team. Yeah. And that's where when you're the Golden State Warriors in their prime and they're making those runs, hey, write the check because they're going to win championships. You need to be in that conversation where you feel like they're a legitimate title contender, should be there if you're going to be willing to commit to that.
Yeah. Speaking of payroll, your favorite baseball team, the Minnesota Twins, could probably use to add some payroll here before the trade deadline rolls around here. That's not for a while, but if you look at this team right now, Chip, I think they've got some potential. They certainly have kind of weathered the storm, weathered some inconsistency. They've been really good against the bad teams and really bad against the good teams, which I suppose is kind of what you should be if you're probably the fifth or sixth best team in the American League. But I think we've talked about this before, and I've talked about this with other guests, like Bobby Nightingale was on a couple weeks ago, but like, as you think about the thing that they're missing the most, it's obviously starting right now pitching, one more good starting pitcher, right? Like one more guy who could start in the playoffs. And do they believe in themselves enough, and do they have enough payroll flexibility, even for just a third of the season, to go get somebody like that, in late July?
Well, that's it. I mean, starting pitching, that is the one thing you address. And now they're talking about Chris Paddock having the dead arm or whatever. But I was looking at, talk about streaky. Here's a couple, and to me, a streak is 4 or more, right? Yeah. That lost 4, lost 5, won 12, lost 7, won 4, lost 5, won 6. Yeah. In a row. I mean, that is the definition of an inconsistent, streaky team that's hard to figure out. I looked at today. This is Monday. We taped it. They were 12-21 against teams that are 500 or better.
Yep.
And so obviously they've done well against the really bad teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to, do you have faith in this team to make the commitment to go out and get pitching help? I don't think they're going to go very far without it. Right?
No.
I mean, it's so if, you're not in a position where you want to just waste Carlos Correa years or, I mean, the outing by Pablo on Sunday, albeit against Oakland, was very great. Hopefully that's a sign that he's getting things turned around. Buxton's starting to hit. We'll see how much that holds up. But it's interesting. I was reading, was it Phil Miller's on a trip? Yeah, Phil Miller's game story from Sunday, the Oakland finale, and both Pablo and Buxton use the word simplify in their approaches.
Yeah.
Don't you wonder sometimes, Mikey, if there's just so much data and analysis and these things that these guys get so much stuff in their brains when things are going wrong that it's almost like hard for them to see the forest for the trees, and they have to step back and say, okay, what do I do well? Like even Buxton said, trust your gut. This is the one sport where I think you can just really overanalyze and get yourself tied in knots thinking about the different voices and I should be doing this and doing that. So I found that interesting in one game story. A pitcher and a position player talking about simplifying, but that's kind of a long-winded answer. Say, I don't know what to make of this team, but I know they need starting pitching help.
Yeah. Well, and to your simplify point, I feel like baseball teams and even basketball teams have tried to do a good job with analytics in terms of don't overload players with the specifics necessarily, or like all the things that they're thinking about. You give the player 2 or 3 things. Like here's the pitch you should throw in that count. Here's what you should look for because we know this is what you should be looking for in certain counts, things like that. But if you give them too much, then it messes them up, right? I think that was a problem with a lot of Buxton's early career was so many people were in his head telling him, be this kind of player, be that kind of player,
kick.
hit the ball on the ground, leg kick. No, hit for power. Like he never really relaxed, and then injuries took over, and that was part of it too. And now pitching is so good that it's hard for anybody to hit. But it's just it does, I think, overwhelm people. I think pitchers probably can handle it a little bit better because they have thrived, I think, on the information age and being able to add velocity, add pitches,
spin rate, and all that,
understand their spin rate, things like that. But they probably overthink it sometimes too, and stop pitching with feel and start pitching a little bit with what the count says or what the card says, and then they're like then they have some regret on it, even if it was by the book the right move. But to the bigger point you just made, we know they need pitching, but you had the 12 and 21 stat. They're 0-14 against the Yankees, Guardians, and Orioles. Like, does that give you faith that you can beat any of those teams in the postseason? I don't know.
Well, no, not right now.
No.
And what was the thing we talked about last year, Mike? Going into the postseason, you had Sonny Gray and Pablo Lopez.
Yep.
Like that was for the first time in forever where you felt like they have a chance now because you're not sending Dobnik out there in Yankee Stadium to pitch.
Right.
I mean, you felt like you had the best pitcher, or you could
fight. It was a fair fight. It was a fair fight at the very least.
So, that's to me, that's where you felt like this feels different finally for a change because they're sending a true starting ace pitcher out there that's going to give you a chance. Lopez has been a disappointment the first half here. Now let's see if he's figured out something. Right. So you would feel if he does and he returns to last year's form, you'd feel okay. You feel good about there, but over the long haul, when you look at those numbers, and they haven't matched up, and so I do as long as Royce Lewis is in the lineup, I like the lineup, and him and Correa obviously have. I think he's helped Correa because Correa's gotten hot since he's returned.
Right.
Let's see if Buxton can continue. His last couple of weeks have been really good, so I do like the lineup. So it's on ownership and management to say, you know what, we believe in the lineup. We know we have an issue that needs to be addressed here. Guess what? It's going to cost them money. Spend it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Chip, final thought is kind of funny. We spent probably 15 minutes talking Timberwolves. We had little Twins. Like Royce and I talked a lot about Twins on Monday. Even though the draft is Friday, I've not given much thought to the Wild. They're a little bit out of sight, out of mind. I mean, the draft is different in the NHL just because you don't see these guys for 2-3 years usually. But they're kind of in a spot where they need some eyeballs on them. They can't have people forgetting about them, especially guys in the media like me.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, and I'll be first to admit, I kind of lost my attention on them this season. Two things. One, I found the Timberwolves so interesting,
compelling,
and they attracted all the excitement. Now it's two different fan bases, typically.
Right.
But the Wolves, what they did was, kind of interesting. But the further point is, I just think that the buyouts have created this perception of, well, can't win
until they're done. They got one more year of them. Yeah.
They got one more year of purgatory, and then come back when we're out of purgatory and we don't have the dead cap money from Parisi Suter buyouts. So whether they believe that internally, I'm telling you, there's that perception.
Yeah.
Within the fan base, when this market is like, no matter what they do, they're and it's, hey, a lot of it's draped in reality. Right?
Yeah.
I mean that. When you're spending,
you don't have $15 million. Basically,
you don't have $15 million, and was it like 17% of the cap or whatever?
Yeah, it's a lot of the cap in that league.
Just gone. That you can't. I mean, that's one great player, a couple really good players that you can't spend money on. It's hard to overcome, and so it is a detriment. They try not to make an excuse. They don't want to make an excuse, but it also, I think, it really just creates a situation where they're just not good enough.
No,
they're just not good enough right now.
I wonder if they understood the perception side of it when they went into it, that the 3 years where the cap hits were so bad that they were like in the $12 to $15 million range, that would make people say, hey, yeah, we can kind of like put these guys a little bit in the back burner. We're not expecting them to be great. And 1 or 2 of those years, they've been able to compete. They've made the playoffs still.
Yeah.
In some of those seasons, just it was last year where they fell off some, but you do kind of put yourself in that territory where people can forget about you if they don't think you can win a championship.
Well, that's it. I mean, and then if you have injuries, you just can't overcome, or it's harder to overcome. I mean, and Billy Guerin is, I mean, I've talked to him a number of times about this. Like, he doesn't want to use it as an excuse either.
No.
Anyone in the organization, or I'm sure he doesn't like the fans just saying, we'll check out for a couple years and stuff.
Nobody wants that.
I think their attendance is still fine. I mean, it's,
right.
They're always going to be good because of this community. But it is, when you talk to people, that's the first thing everyone says. Well,
right.
Buyouts. What are you going to do? Buyouts. Can't compete. And so it's weird because you don't want to use it as an excuse, because you just hate excuses in sports, no matter what the injuries or whatever. But it's also reality. It's like they can't wiggle themselves out of problems because this money is just tied up into something you can't control, or it's their choice. And that's the other thing. This is Billy Guerin's choice.
And they do it. I think they would do it again. I think they wanted to change the culture enough that's what they did.
Yeah. And so, but it's also easy to say, when you don't make the playoffs and it just seems like you can't ever really build anything because you're just not quite good enough, and then you have injuries or whatever. So they were a little bit out of sight, out of mind. And I don't know if there's anything you can do in a draft, because like you said, with the NHL draft, you're not seeing these players for a number of years. And so it's hard to get super excited about it, So they're just kind of in this weird phase right now, but but I will say, I think it was worth the shot, Mike, because, we talk so much about tanking and, should Leopold, and we know that they didn't want to do that, but they were in that, much like the Vikings, good but not great cycle of heck that it's, it's kind of a comfortable place for people to be in teams, because you're
especially owners, because the building's always going to be relatively full. You're going to make the playoffs.
And there's a belief that you have a chance to make the playoffs. You might not do it every year, but you're going to be competitive. You're not going to be terrible. You're going to be just good enough. Some years you're going to be better. You're going to be, you might even win a game, or you might win a series, but you're not if you sit there and you're honest with yourself, you're not a legitimate championship team.
No.
So, but it's hard to say, you know what, we're going to take a step back with the hope, because you don't have to hope when you're in that situation. You're competitive. So I understood what the Wild and Leopold did for years, like, really try to just maintain and see if the formula could get you there. So I understood what Billy Guerin did. Said, you know what? I don't care what this is. This needs to be done. We're going to change the trajectory. And so, on that hand, I appreciate that he's willing to try something, and there might be some short-term pain that goes with it to try to, with these young guys coming along here, coming behind, that it might lead to something different.
Well, and as soon as the buyouts are done, we're going to have to worry about a Kaprizov extension.
Well, that's it.
He's only got 1 year left after the buyouts are done. People are going to be. That's the next thing everybody can worry about. But that's a story for another day.
Leave? I know. You can see it coming down, right?
Story for another day. We'll talk about that this time next year. Chip Scoggins, appreciate it as always. Glad you got some time off, as did I.
Same
and
man.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right, brother. See you, man.
Great stuff from Chip, and he couldn't have known this, but I am surprised that he did not find a way to work in Tennessee baseball into our conversation. I gave him carte blanche at the beginning of the segment before we started recording, like, hey, anything you want to talk about, we go for it. He did not mention Tennessee baseball. Tennessee baseball won the Men's College World Series. First time in Tennessee history that they have won that. Chip, of course, huge Tennessee Volunteers fan. Goes way back with that program. Most of it's football, a little bit of basketball, but I'm sure he is thrilled that Tennessee has won its first Men's College World Series championship as well. Also in the cooler here, let's finish up. Like I said at the beginning, Edmonton almost came all the way back. This would have been an amazing historic comeback in the NHL. They came back from 3-0 to tie the series 3-3, but Florida prevails 2-1. A tight kind of game on Monday in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. My goodness, that season lasted a long time. Not complaining because that was a great game, but man, when the draft is Friday and you just finished Monday, that is a lot of hockey, a lot of season. NBA was almost as bad. The finals were a little shorter than they could have been, but you got the draft coming up tomorrow. Great season, great champion for Florida. Congratulations to them. What a series, what a story. And I'm sure we'll have more NHL draft talk later this week on a show because that draft starts Friday. Like I said, Chris Hine joins me tomorrow to talk NBA draft. A lot of drafts this week, a lot of stuff going on. So we'll get into a lot of that later on this week. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.